It seems Games Workshop doesn't much like miracle dice for the Adepta Sororitas. Very soon we will tackle some key areas we want to address. And so in the quarterly Munitorum Field Manual, as well as the 6-month balance data slate, there will be changes to the miracle dice of the Adepta Sororitas. So what's wrong with miracle dice? Well, this is a game where you roll dice to randomly determine if something happens. When you have the ability to use miracle dice, where you substitute a pre-existing dice roll of your choice with the roll you were going to make, as long as you had a decent miracle dice, then you can manipulate how the game is played. It can swing the game too much. Rolling a 6 is nice, but knowing that you will roll a 6 because you have a miracle dice of a 6 already there to pass an AP-4 attack to keep your exorcist alive to fire next turn is going to upset your opponent. For a lot of people, miracle dice are just not fair. There's not a chance that something happens. It is going to happen if the Battle Sister player wants it to happen. Fate dice for the Eldari were basically identical, and I had a long chat with an Eldar player who is very happy right now about the differences between miracle dice and fate dice, and there wasn't too much between them. Fate dice was part of what made Eldari really strong in the first 6 months of 10th edition until their fate dice number was drastically brought down. The Adepta Sororitas are not performing at the levels the Eldar were at that time. They are performing a little bit above average. But when their codex came out, when Games Workshop started thinking about changes, the Battle Sisters were performing way higher than expected. And that codex was written based on the results of 6 months prior, when the Sisters Index didn't work too well. So no matter how the meta is right this minute, the changes may be more reflecting the past few months rather than the current month. But there have always been problems with miracle dice in 10th edition. Some miracle dice are just not worth much. In 9th edition, because of how leadership worked, a miracle dice of a 1 could be used to automatically pass a leadership test, so having low miracle dice could be good. In 10th edition, leadership is something you want high rolls for, so you always want high miracle dice to do things. So any low miracle dice don't do anything unless you discard them to activate abilities like the Palatine's Rapturous Blows. But we are keeping miracle dice. Miracle dice are sticking around as a basic part. They can't change to miracle points or miraculous actions, as we've seen in previous editions. None of that or anything else I've suggested. Eldari can drop fate dice because they are having a full codex rework, and the fate dice are disappearing, for the most part, and being replaced. Sisters are not losing miracle dice, we're just having some parts changed. A complete shift would mean that the rest of the codex units would have to be redone. So you can do that when you are making a new codex for the Eldari, because the Farseers can have a new ability to replace their current one that says they can change any fate dice into a 6. A Dialogus can't without redoing the whole codex. They already have that ability to change a miracle dice to a 6, so we know we are keeping miracle dice and they will have numerical values. Because I really can't see Games Workshop right now changing everything in the codex. We're just looking at miracle dice usage and generation. Miracle dice are still here. I can't see Games Workshop giving us more miracle dice or making them all better. If we were underperforming in the meta, then maybe. But that isn't what we see. And Adepta Sororitas scare a lot of players by taking the random out of a random dice roll game. So we have to predict what we've got based on miracle dice usage and generation. However it changes, we may not be able to just pass important rolls. We will have to know the odds and pray in real life to the God Emperor to give us odds above those average rolls. To know the odds of destroying a Chaos Predator with melter guns and no miracle dice, use the Adept Roll app. That is today's sponsor. When you know that in the meta Chaos Predators are coming out, know what it takes to kill them. If you know that your regular opponent always brings a Baneblade, figure out how much damage it can do to your Battle Sisters, and then figure out just how many you could save if the unit had an Imagifier for a 2+ save and 4+ invulnerable save, just so you could be prepared beforehand. When Battlescribe updates after the balance patch, or if there are no profile changes, you can do a direct from Battlescribe import to save you slowly inputting the information, then double checking if it is correct. Or you can go off the Games Workshop app. The Adept Roll Math Hammer app accepts screenshots of the 40k app. The Adept Roll Math Hammer app is available on iOS and Android with download links in the description and pinned comments. But like I said, we are not expecting any unit changes, and I don't think there will be many ability changes. How miracle dice are generated will change. I can see simple changes, but none of them are in our favor. What we may have is, instead of the current rule where you get a miracle dice at the start of each player turn, you get one miracle dice at the start of each battle round. This is how it was in the 8th edition Codex, before it was changed in 9th edition to give us a bit more power. Having a miracle dice once per battle round also gets rid of a strange loophole situation where you may be playing multiplayer games like the current White Dwarf is suggesting, and then you would get 4 miracle dice a battle round if there are 4-way competing players. And in 10th edition elsewhere, we have seen a rule that says, Battle Sisters get a miracle dice but not at the start of every turn, just at the start of your turn. This is in boarding actions. You only generate a miracle dice on your own turn, not your opponent's, but you add 1 to the miracle dice generated to a maximum of a 6. So you no longer get miracle dice of a 1. There are no pointless or near pointless miracle dice. At the very least, you will be able to save a Paragon Warsuit if you're hit by an AP0 attack. But another generation of miracle dice I think that will disappear is on the Triumph of St. Catherine. Right now, at the start of each battle round, the Triumph generates you a miracle dice of a 6. So from the very start of the game, you will have a miracle dice of a 6. And we saw in the previous quarterly Munitorum Field Manual that the Triumph went up a lot of points. 60 points from 190 to 250. This miracle dice of a 6 may be part of it. When there is a very big points increase, that suggests that this is a unit in the crosshairs of Games Workshop ready for change. So if it lost its get a miracle dice of a 6, then its points could drop down by 30 points if it just lost that ability completely. Then we would just have to use it for its really good combat and its ability to speed units towards the enemy. That's still worth it. Or we may see a bigger change. You generate miracle dice like you do at the moment, but only 4s, 5s, and 6s are valid dice. So every time you generate a miracle dice, you roll the miracle dice, but if it's a 1, 2, or 3, you would discard it. This would be very much like how the Simulacrum ability works right now. You generate a miracle dice for every unit that controls an objective. Those objectives will generate a dice. On a 1 to 3, it's nothing. On a 4, you get a 4. On a 5, you get a 5. On a 6, you get a 6. It's a solution of sorts. It's just me saying, hey, Games Workshop, so these low miracle dice aren't really doing anything. Can you sort them out? Yeah, absolutely, no problem. Every time you generate a miracle dice, you get rid of any low miracle dice. There you go. No longer are there low miracle dice that aren't doing anything. Every miracle dice you generate will be a decent roll. Oh, wow. Thanks, Games Workshop. Yeah, that's not really what I had in mind, but it technically does solve a problem I had. Technically. So hopefully we don't get malicious compliance with that particular problem that Adepta Sororitas players have. Otherwise we start disliking miracle dice as a whole, and then when Games Workshop's like, okay, we'll change the army rule, we're like, yeah, get rid of it, and everyone agrees. Who's to say? But if that was the change, I can't see a points drop on the Dialogus, even though her ability would just be changing a 4 or 5 into a 6, because a lot of her points are based around her being the cheapest unit that exists who can go alone and complete secondary missions. That's just how she's used in tournament games. She's not the only character to do that, as I've explained before, but she is the cheapest, and Games Workshop won't want her to get too cheap. So all of those options are changing miracle dice generation. From the second part of the quote, let's also think about miracle dice usage. A change to both parts is expected. So using miracle dice. Games Workshop may have identified that some part of the list of ways to use miracle dice is the problem. Dropping one of these bullet points may be the only change to miracle dice usage. So maybe you can't use miracle dice on hit rolls anymore. This stops you having a tactic I suggested for the Army of Faith. Put a Dialogus in a Battle Sister unit, use Overwatch, and make sure that with the miracle dice and the Dialogus ability, you are guaranteed to hit with melter weapons. Or perhaps miracle dice don't count as unmodified dice anymore, so you can't use a miracle dice of a 6 in a unit with a Palatine to have lethal hits on that attack. You can't use a 6 to get devastating wounds on a multi-melter in a unit with Astrid and Agatha. That's another workaround. Or maybe the damage rolls is the bullet point that Games Workshop finds problematic. If you need to score 5 wounds to kill an enemy monster, an Exorcist will use a 5 to ensure it dies. With Miracle Dice, if I have Miracle Dice, and you can wound the enemy, which is the difficult bit, less of a problem in the Bringers of Flame with their increased strength, but Miracle Dice let you guarantee lots of damage after that wound roll. It is always deflating to hit and then wound, see that failed armor save, but you roll a 1 for the Melter Gun's damage. Instead, the Battle Sisters may be considered not fragile enough. So if Games Workshop stopped us from using it on saving throws, that is the difference between a dead tank and one ready to fire. The difference between a Dominion squad being wiped out or holding onto an objective. From your own games, you will know which of these aspects is the most annoying to opponents of the Battle Sisters. I really hope there's no change to the charge rolls bullet point. In 10th edition, there is already a limit of 1 Miracle Dice per test, meaning you can't do a thing that a lot of people did in 9th edition, and always have 2 Miracle Dice ready, totaling 9, to always pass a charge from Deep Strike. That is a good aspect of the rule we already have. I can't see that changing. But if they took away our ability to use a Miracle Dice on one of the dice on a charge roll, we can no longer guarantee short charges, and we are less likely to succeed at longer charges. If the units of the Penitent Host detachment don't get into combat, they die really easily. A high Miracle Dice on a charge will let them get into combat, which is where they need to be because that's their whole purpose. They're a glass cannon. If they're not doing the cannon part, all you have is an army of glass. And we play with plastic models, so that makes no sense. Unless yours are metal, in which case that is very cool. A different change to Miracle Dice could be to limit the number of Miracle Dice that can be used in any phase. In past editions, Miracle Dice were limited to once per phase, not once per unit per phase, unless you had a simulacrum. That is the difference between being able to save both your Exorcist and Castigator, and having to decide if you use a Miracle Dice now to save the Castigator, when your more valuable, potentially, Exorcist might need that Miracle Dice, but you won't know until you've decided to save the Castigator with the only Miracle Dice you're allowed to use that phase. In smaller games of 40k, this will not be a problem, but it would be a nerf to 2000 point games and encourage us to go more elite so that we always have those specialized units that we know every phase, this is the unit that's going to get the Miracle Dice. Or it isn't limited quite that far and make it 2 units per phase. Some sort of middle ground between the two, but a reduction in the number of units that can use Miracle Dice. Miracle Dice are the army rule, but it's also going to affect the detachments, which detachments are used, and which detachments have abilities that work. The Army of Faith needs more Miracle Dice than other detachments to function. 2 of its stratagems generate Miracle Dice, as do 3 of its enhancements. If we have fewer Miracle Dice over the course of the game, players may come to this detachment to recoup what they have lost. Or we can accept our losses of Miracle Dice, stop trying to chase having 2 Miracle Dice worth using at once, so that the detachment rule, it just becomes pointless, even more pointless than already. We may just give up on Miracle Dice being a key factor anyway, and just play Bringers of Flame. That may be what a lot of people end up doing. But I really enjoy the Army of Faith. So if we are changing how Miracle Dice are generated, perhaps the Army of Faith detachment rule, please, could give us extra Miracle Dice at the start of the battle round? Or their detachment uses the version of Miracle Dice as we have currently, pre-nerf. Like anything in this detachment is not affected by the changes that are about to happen. For example, we know that in the Eldari Codex, the Seer Council detachment will still have Fate Dice, even as the Eldari as a whole have that army rule swapped out for a new battle focus rule. So these are just changes happening to Miracle Dice, not a wider Adepta Sororitas Codex overhaul. So don't expect the Dogmata to be able to join Repentia or any of the things I would like to see implemented. And you can see more, as well as other ways to change Miracle Dice in this video. What do you think will happen? If we throw enough ideas at the wall, one of them will be correct and we can claim to be geniuses with foresight gifted by the Emperor. Have a great day of 40k.